Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and as always, welcome back to yet another video. With us today, tackling a series that we haven't quite touched on in a while, Tekken. Because whilst we did get the huge release of Armor King, one of the biggest takeaways from his reveal, as well as Season 2, has been the sudden inclusion of the new character, Miary. And there's been a very good reason behind this, and not simply just because she's a new character. Because ever since her tease a few months back, there have been some hints in the ever so finer details of the character, something that is more or less confirmed in this trailer, showing that she isn't your traditional new character, but instead a legacy one, an inheritor of the will of Orge, being branded in-game as the fighting god reborn, canonically making her the second Orge to date. So that's it, right? Well, not quite, as there's actually quite a lot more to this than has been presented to us at a surface level, with hints of information that have been interwoven throughout this trailer that somewhat give us a better understanding of Miary and the wider narrative surrounding both her and the legacy of Orge. So today we will be pulling apart her bio and character, utilizing some of the information sprinkled throughout the trailer, as well as piecing scattered bits of information that we do know about the Orges and their mysterious origins. And to somewhat solidify a lot of these ideas, we will be taking a lot of tweets from Harada himself that does discuss what's going on with the character beyond the bios and the trailers, giving us a more well-rounded picture of her that allows us to understand the significance of her inclusion and her potential within Tekken moving forward. Because I firmly believe that her implementation here actually paints a path forward for the next game's story. But just a quick reminder before we do get rolling here, that if you like what we do here and want to see some more Tekken content on the channel, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as well as try the new hype mechanic next to the comments. It's a small thing, but it goes a tremendous way in helping support not only this video, but the channel out as a whole. And I mean, hey, if this video does well, I'll probably start putting out some more Tekken content in the future. So let's actually start by talking and analysing Miary herself as a character. What do we know about the young girl from the trailer alone? Well, the trailer itself does give us the impression that she's a young, plucky, and very friendly individual. Whilst clearly extremely talented in hand-to-hand combat, she does actually seem far more interested in making friends out of her opponents than simply just going toe-to-toe with them and then moving on her way. But naturally, the huge important point of this trailer is when she triggers her install state, unleashing an awakened form, showing that she's far from just an ordinary fighter and possesses supernatural abilities and weapons, ones that grant access to the spirit of the lands through a staff as well as a snake gauntlet. Which beckons the question of, how did we go from this to this? Well, that's easy, because it's not actually the same Orge at all. Not just that, but I do in fact believe that she herself may not actually be an Orge. I'll elaborate it all in a second, but first, let's paint the canvas a bit to lay the foundation of which Miary kind of falls into. So, what do we know about Orge then? Well, despite its branding of being the god of fighting and having surfaced in Mexico, the deity itself isn't of earthly origin nor human creation, actually being alien in nature and having fallen from the stars, a weapon of a lost race that was buried deep within the earth. Later, of course, being awakened during the events of Tekken 3. And I think we all know how that goes. But what has not been disclosed, or at the very least, canonized officially, is that recently it was confirmed that the Orge we have in Tekken 3 was not the only Orge sent to Earth, with creative visionary and director Harada having disclosed that prior to the events of Tekken 3, there's actually quite a few of them scattered across the globe, with one assigned to each continent, with there now being 6 remaining. So from what we do know of the Orges, is that one has been defeated and is dead, and the newest one has just surfaced now, with the rest still presumably dormant as of making this video. Now, mind you, whilst Orges only ever canonically appeared in Tekken 3, the idea and concept of this was actually lightly sprinkled in Tekken Tag 2, where the god of fighting calls forth his fellow brothers and sisters, and together they wreak havoc and destruction across the globe, engulfing it in a ball of fire. But of course, 1, with this being an arcade ladder ending, and 2, it being a tag game, it's pretty much non-canon. But I did want to mention this to show you just how far back the idea of this does exist. Which now brings us onto this new particular ogre, because although there's visual similarities in their bestial form and features, from what we know of both of them here, they're actually pretty different to one another, even as characters and the somewhat nature they have with each other. With Tekken 3 Ogre largely framed as a villain, whereas the one we have here is actually framed as a hero, with it being mentioned in Miyary's bio that the people of Madagascar revere him, even dubbing him as the Silver Fighting God. And even Harada himself on Twitter has come out and said that the people of Madagascar adore him, having been responsible for fighting off enemies from lands beyond. As for who those individuals are, we don't really know, but it does paint an interesting contrast against the ogre of old. This one chose to never actually leave the lands of Madagascar in order to hunt stronger enemies, leading to the question of why? Well, if I'm theorizing, I believe that it may be due to the point of origin for each ogre and where they actually arose, with each one taking on the nature and characteristics of its surrounding, ultimately determining what form they take. So with the ogre from Tekken 3 having awoken in Mexico where Aztecs and Mayans performed blood sacrifices, it looks like the deity took on the bloodthirsty traits of that culture and its origins, which led to the slaughter of the Tekken Force, and then it's going out to satiate its bloodlust by killing other fellow worthy fighters. Whereas this ogre here looks to have just naturally awoken in the quaint lands of Madagascar, embracing the wilderness of the African wilds. Which of course, once again stirs up the question of, how do we go from this to this? Well, that might actually be because I don't believe them to be the same character. Not exactly. Here's the thing, right? When we look at her bio, it makes it very clear that she's human in nature, not of ogre origin or creation. She's not 100 or 1,000 years old, but simply 18. But it is softly implied that her birth may be supernatural in nature, having been born with what is known as red crimson coal eyes. A sign, according to a fortune-telling grandmother, that she was gifted by the Silver Fighting God, to be him reborn. So her supernatural origin made it so that growing up, learning martial arts and imitating animals was incredibly easy and very natural for her. She by all intents and purposes was a prodigy, but she would only really come to fulfill her birthright around the age of 18, where her powers had fully awoken and she was granted this immense power, gaining a staff, a snake gauntlet, as well as 2 lemurs to guide her, individuals to teach her on the path. So why is this so important and why am I bringing this up? Well, it's because I don't actually believe she's the god reborn at all, but instead this ogre's avatar and an extension of him. Because think about it, right? The biggest difference between these 2 current ogres right now is actually how they represent themselves to the world, how they symbolize their point of origin and where they derive from. The one from Tekken 3 literally had a stone golem take shape as an extension of who he was. But the ogre here doesn't do that, which is why Miary steps into the picture. It just makes so much sense, with the weapons and lemurs being a symbolic passing of the torch. Now, as for what became of him, that's anyone's guess, but I do have my theories that I will touch on in a bit. But I do believe he is still alive here, acting as a source of power for her, with the lemurs being his second pair of eyes. Which of course brings us on to the question of, why was she made at all? In what way is she important enough to even be included as part of a DLC pass? And I think it may actually be due to the significance of her origin and the most recent events of the Unforgotten Echoes story, which propels Heihachi back front and center as the main villain of the franchise. But why is that important now? Well, that would be due to Heihachi's own personal interest in Ogre. For those who have forgotten or might not be aware, following the events of Tekken 3, Heihachi had a deep interest in the beast. In fact, so much so that he took strands of DNA from his remains and attempted to merge it with that of his own, believing that if he could do this successfully, then he could achieve a form of immortality. Yet, something like this was actually impossible, at least without the devil gene, the key component that he needed in order to achieve this. Hence why during the events of Tekken 4, he kidnaps Jin and also tries to capture Kazuya. And since that game, it's actually been kind of impossible for the character. That is, up until now. With the inclusion of Reina, having been the first Devil Blood-born Mishima since Kazuya, Reina's significance to the Tekken narrative may go beyond than simply being someone that has the Devil gene. And with Reina's own infatuation with her father, desperately seeking his approval, it's never been more possible for Heihachi to obtain this goal. And this is the thing, right? What's to necessarily say that Miary Zhao is that important to this idea and narrative, and not simply just someone that introduces this idea and concept? Because even without her inclusion, there's still 5 remaining ogres, which means 5 other potential hosts and avatars for these fighting gods. And it just makes so much sense in my mind, because it also can't be a mere coincidence that her true powers awoke 6 months ago, where Heihachi did die, meaning that this ogre may have actually been keeping her safe, knowing full well of Heihachi's own plans, having seen and learned what happened to his kin. Hell, it may actually be why he's physically absent here, and acting through an avatar. Whilst it's far too early to say what the story of Tekken 9 will be, with all of the current characters and ideas spread across the board here, this just makes so much sense to me, especially as to why a character like this would be included, or even created for that matter. It must be the building blocks up to something quite big, because the ogres themselves are so incredibly important to that of the Tekken mythos. So with that said and everything covered here, that's been it for my lore, story and character deep dive and breakdown of Miary Zhao, analysing everything from her creation, her ties to Ogre, and possible significance to the future of Tekken moving forward. So I do hope you have enjoyed this video and learnt more by doing so, as I really wanted to do a deep dive and get into like the meat of this character, as I do feel like there's something there right now, and the significance of her inclusion must be with some purpose at the very least. So with that said and in mind, what are your overall thoughts on Miary Zhao? What do you think of her look, her design? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. Because for me, man, as a lore aficionado, I'm super down for us to explore the background and more fantastical and mystical side of Tekken. It's just so incredibly interesting to understand the mythoses of these different cultures and the different monsters that lie within them. I want to see my dumb Toten Ogre monster punch my Dragon Devil in the face, god damn it. But then again, that's probably the God of War player in me coming out. But until the next one, everyone, that has been it for me. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.